Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fascinating, a lecture by this guy, Mr. Hutchings, about the Hispanic American civil rights movement.
Oh, cool.
But we're not covering the usual early 20th century stuff.
Oh, okay.
This is post-1945, so get ready for some stuff you probably haven't heard before.
Sounds good. I'm always up for learning something new. So what's Mr. Hutchings' main argument? What's the big takeaway?
Well, right off the bat, he challenges us to think about this term Hispanic American. Is it even accurate?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's a broad term, right? You've got Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, Puerto Ricans, all lumped together.
Exactly. And their experiences were so different, right? So how do you have a movement for shared rights when everyone's coming from such distinct places?
That's such a good point. It's that tension between the group and the individual, you know? You need that collective identity to fight for change, but you also can't ignore the unique struggles each group faces. And that's exactly what Mr. Hutchings highlights. He says we can't treat the post-1945 movement as one monolithic thing. Each group had a different starting point, shaped by how the U.S. had treated them even before this period.
It's like setting off on a race where everyone's starting line is different. Some folks are already miles ahead, while others are starting way behind.
Exactly. And that makes it really hard to talk about progress as if it's this neat, linear thing. For example, let's look at Mexican Americans. After World War II, you have all these veterans coming home expecting to be treated as equals after fighting for their country.
Yeah. Talk about a wake-up call for America.
Right, and these guys weren't just going to sit back and accept discrimination. They put their lives on the line, they'd seen the world, they knew they deserved better.
And this energy, it didn't just come out of nowhere, did it? Groups like LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, they'd been fighting for equality for decades before the war.
Oh, absolutely. LULAC was already active, pushing for educational equality, labor rights, you name it. So the groundwork was there. But those returning veterans, they added fuel to the fire, you know? They pushed the movement into a new phase.
It's like they came back and said, we fought for freedom overseas, now we're going to fight for it right here at home. And they had the experience and the determination to make it happen.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And their efforts led to some major victories. Think about the Mendez v. Westminster case in 1947. This was huge. They challenged school segregation for Mexican American kids, and they won.
And that was way before Brown v. Board of Education. It's amazing how these different civil rights struggles, they were all intertwined, feeding into each other, like progress in one area inspired action in another.
Totally. And then, of course, you can't talk about the movement without mentioning Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
Right.
Their work with the United Farm Workers, it wasn't just about wages. It was about human dignity, you know? The recognition that these laborers who were feeding the nation deserved respect and fair treatment.
Right. It was about basic human rights. And Chavez, he had this incredible way with words. One of his quotes really stuck with me. He said, "We draw our strength from the very despair in which we have been forced to live." It's powerful stuff.
It is. It captures that unwavering spirit, that refusal to give up in the face of such immense challenges. But it's important to remember that this is just one part of the story. We focused a lot on the Mexican American experience, but what about other groups? Like the Puerto Ricans, for example. They were facing a different set of challenges, especially in places like New York City.
Oh, right. Because they were already U.S. citizens. So their fight wasn't about gaining citizenship. It was about battling the discrimination and prejudice they faced despite having that legal status. It's like a whole other layer of complexity.
Exactly. And that's where groups like the Young Lords or YLO come in. They drew inspiration from the Black Panthers, but they tailored their activism to the specific needs and cultural identity of the Puerto Rican community.
I've heard some crazy stories about the Young Lords. They took over a church and turned it into a community center. Free breakfast, healthcare, you name it. They weren't afraid to take action.
Oh, absolutely. They were all about direct action, meeting the immediate needs of their community while also fighting for systemic change. And for them, that fight was deeply tied to their cultural identity, the denial of their culture, the pressure to assimilate. It fueled their activism. If you want to understand that feeling, you should check out Pedro Pietri's poem, Puerto Rican Obituary. It's incredibly powerful.
Wow, okay. So we've got Mexican Americans fighting for basic equality, Puerto Ricans battling discrimination despite being citizens. It's fascinating how these different struggles were playing out alongside each other, each with its own unique context.
It is. And believe it or not, things get even more complicated when we bring in the Cuban-American experience. This is where the Cold War throws a whole new wrench into the mix, and things get really, really interesting.
Oh, man. Okay. I can't wait to dive into that. But I think we should save that for part 2. Give everyone a chance to process all this amazing information. This is heavy stuff.
Good idea. We've covered a lot of ground already. We'll pick up with the Cuban-American story next time. See you then.
See ya?
Yep.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with part 2, where things get even more complex and fascinating. Stay tuned.
All right, so last time, we were just starting to touch on how complex this whole Hispanic American label is.
Yeah, it's like trying to squeeze all these different experiences into one box, and it just doesn't fit.
Exactly. And to understand those differences, Mr. Hutchings dives into these different schools of thought among historians. It's like putting on different pairs of glasses. Each one helps us see the same events in a new way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what's the first pair of glasses we're trying on?
Well, first up, we've got the progressive school. Guys like Carey McWilliams, they were all about looking at the big picture, the underlying systems that create inequality.
Right, right. The progressives, they were all about those systemic issues, not just individual prejudice, but like how the whole system is rigged.
Exactly. McWilliams, for example, he didn't just focus on isolated incidents of discrimination against Mexican Americans. He dug deep into the systems of labor exploitation, how these folks were trapped in these cycles of poverty, and it wasn't by accident.
Oh, I see. So it's like they weren't just poor because of bad luck, but because the system was designed to keep them that way.
That's the argument. He lays it all out in his book, North from Mexico. It's a classic. He shows how everything from land ownership to labor practices to immigration policies, they all work together to create this system that kept Hispanic workers at a disadvantage.
Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff. So like he's saying it was deliberate, not just some unintended consequence?
That's the gist of it, yeah. And that's what makes this school of thought so powerful. It forces you to look beyond individual actions and think about the broader forces at play.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these different lenses change the whole picture. So what about the next school?
Well, shifting gears a bit, you've got the social history school. These folks, they're all about the grassroots, the everyday people who make history happen, but whose stories often get overlooked.
Oh, right. Like the folks who might not be in the history books, but they were out there doing the work, organizing, making things happen.
Exactly. Vicky L. Ruiz, she's a big name in this school, and she's done some amazing work highlighting the contributions of women in particular. Like we talked about Dolores Huerta, right?
Yeah, she was amazing, a powerhouse alongside Cesar Chavez.
Right, but the social history school helps us see beyond these big figures. They shine a light on people like Emma Tenayuca, for example.
Emma Tenayuca. Okay, gotta admit, that name doesn't ring a bell.
Well, she led this massive pecan sheller strike in Texas back in the 1930s. Thousands of workers, mostly Mexican-American women, walked off the job demanding better wages and working conditions.
Wow, see, that's the kind of story I never learned in school. And it makes you think, how many other stories are out there just waiting to be discovered?
Tons. And that's what makes this school of thought so important. It helps us see that history isn't just made by presidents and generals. It's made by ordinary people taking extraordinary action.
All right, so we've got the big picture progressives and the grassroots-focused social historians. What's next?
All right, now let's go global with the post-colonial school. These folks are looking at how the history of colonialism, specifically U.S. intervention in Latin America, shaped Hispanic American identity and activism.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like what happens in one part of the world can have these ripple effects that impact communities thousands of miles away.
Exactly. Juan Gonzalez, he's a major voice in this school. He wrote Harvest of Empire, which is all about connecting those dots.
So they're saying we can't understand the fight for civil rights in the U.S. without understanding the history of U.S. involvement in Latin America.
That's a big part of it, yeah. It's about seeing how these struggles for equality were also about grappling with the legacy of colonialism and its ongoing impact.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, you can't just erase that history and pretend it doesn't matter. It's all connected.
Exactly. And it adds this whole other layer of complexity to understanding the fight for belonging and identity.
All right, so far we've got 3 lenses. The big systems, the everyday folks, the global perspective. Is there another one?
There is. Last but not least, we've got the revisionist school. Now, these folks are kind of the rule breakers, the ones who challenge the traditional narratives and offer up alternative interpretations of history.
Oh, I like the sound of that. Shaking things up, making us question what we thought we knew.
Exactly. One of the leading revisionist thinkers is Jorge Mariscal. He's done some fascinating work on the military recruitment of Latinos, arguing that it was a form of conditional inclusion.
Conditional inclusion? What does that even mean?
Well, he's saying that the military offered Latinos a pathway to Americanness, like, you can be one of us if you fight for us.
Hmm.
But it didn't necessarily translate to full equality in other aspects of life.
Oh, wow. So it's like you can risk your life for the country, but you still might not be treated as an equal citizen. That's messed up.
Right. And it highlights the complexities and contradictions of this whole fight for civil rights. The revisionists push us to look beyond simple narratives of progress and acknowledge the nuances, the setbacks, the ongoing struggles, even amidst apparent victories.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. There are detours, roadblocks, and sometimes what looks like a step forward might actually be masking deeper inequalities.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to engage with all these different schools of thought. They each offer a unique piece of the puzzle, helping us see the Hispanic American civil rights movement from multiple angles and gain a more nuanced understanding of this complex history.
I'm with you. It's like having a 360-degree view of the landscape. You can't fully appreciate the terrain if you're only looking from one direction.
Right. You need all those perspectives to get the full picture.
But even with all these different perspectives, I'm still kind of grappling with this question of belonging. Like, what ties all this together? Is there a common thread that runs through these diverse experiences?
That's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of what it means to be Hispanic American in the United States. It's about navigating this space between two cultures, holding on to your heritage while trying to carve out a place in a society that hasn't always been welcoming.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about fitting in, right? It's about having your identity recognized, your contributions valued, your voice heard, like demanding respects, not just asking for acceptance.
You got it. It's about challenging the very definition of what it means to be American and pushing for a more inclusive understanding of national identity. And that's a struggle that continues to this day.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper into that. Let's explore how these different groups navigated that struggle for belonging and identity. So we've talked about these different schools of thought and how they help us see this whole movement in a new light.
Yeah, it's like we've been putting together a puzzle.
Yeah.
Right? With all these different pieces.
Exactly. But there's this one piece that keeps popping up for me. Like, it's the key to the whole puzzle. And that piece is belonging.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a thread that runs through all these different struggles, this desire to belong, to be recognized, to have your voice heard.
It's not just about fitting in, right? It's more than that.
It is. It's about having your identity respected, your contributions valued. It's about shaping the very definition of what it means to be American. And that's a really powerful idea.
And it makes me think about what Mr. Hutchings said at the beginning, how that label Hispanic American, it can be helpful, but it can also kind of flatten everything out, you know?
Totally. It lumps all these different experiences together, when in reality, each group had its own unique path to belonging. Like for Mexican Americans, a lot of it was about reclaiming land, pushing back against this history of dispossession.
Right, right. Like they were here before the U.S. even existed, and then they were treated as outsiders in their own land.
Exactly. And for Puerto Ricans, it was different. They were already U.S. citizens, but they were fighting for their cultural identity to be recognized, to be seen as both American and Puerto Rican.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like they didn't have to fight for citizenship, but they had to fight for respect, for the right to be themselves.
You got it. And then you've got the Cuban-Americans. Their story is so intertwined with the Cold War and this whole idea of exile. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like each group is adding its own verse to this big song about America. It's a song that's always evolving, always changing.
And that's what makes it so beautiful, right? This mix of voices all coming together to create something new.
It makes me think about all those individual stories we talked about, too. Like the woman who led the pecan sheller strike, those veterans coming back from the war demanding equality. These are the stories that really bring history to life.
Yeah. And it's those stories, those everyday acts of courage and resilience that really shaped this movement. They remind us that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people.
And so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to keep digging into those stories. Talk to your families, explore local archives, you know. There's so much out there waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to question the narratives you've been taught, to look for different perspectives. History is an ongoing conversation, and it's up to all of us to participate in that conversation.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about the past, right? It's about understanding who we are today and where we're going as a nation. This fight for belonging, for inclusion, for justice, it's a fight that's still going on.
It is. And by learning from those who came before us, we can be better equipped to carry on that fight, to build a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Well said. So that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you've enjoyed this journey with us, and we hope it's inspired you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper into the complexities of history. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.